A boy's hand clutches a leather identity booklet, sewage-stained, inside his coat pocket. Berlin, April 28, 1945. Soviet artillery is 3 kilometers away, close enough to feel the rumble through basement walls. SS-Oberscharführer Klaus Reinhardt stands at a checkpoint on Alexanderplatz, civilians streaming past him like a broken river. The boy approaches, 12 years old, emaciated. Reinhardt grabs the booklet, flips it open. A Jew? Still alive? He laughs, shows it to the other guards, then drops it in the sewage gutter, boots it farther away. Crawl for it. Entertain me. The boy crawls, doesn't look at Reinhardt's face while he does it. Retrieves the booklet, walks 7 blocks to a basement, clutches it like scripture. Inside the cover, his mother's handwriting, her name, his birth date. That booklet would travel 650 kilometers to a Nuremberg courtroom. What Reinhardt didn't know, witnesses always remember their tormentors' faces. By late April 1945, Berlin was burning from the inside out. Soviet forces had encircled the city, artillery fire constant enough that people stopped flinching. At the Alexanderplatz checkpoint, SS-Oberscharführer Klaus Reinhardt, 32 years old with an 8-year service record, processed civilians trying to flee west. He was known for efficiency. Over 4,000 people had passed through his checkpoint in the final month alone. But efficiency wasn't his only reputation. According to people who survived those days, Reinhardt had a pattern: public humiliation as crowd control. Make an example of one person and the rest stay quiet. The boy approached the checkpoint carrying nothing but his identity booklet, an Ausweis, standard-issue leather cover, pages yellowed from being carried too long. He was 12 years old, weighed maybe 65 pounds, hollow-eyed from malnutrition. Reinhardt grabbed the booklet, flipped it open. Jewish, still alive somehow. He laughed, a sound people later described as theatrical, like he was performing for the other guards. Then he dropped the booklet into the sewage gutter that ran along the checkpoint and kicked it farther down. Crawl for it. Entertain me. The boy crawled. Other guards laughed. Civilians watched in silence, eyes down. He retrieved the booklet, sewage water soaking through the leather, his mother's handwriting inside the cover already smudged. He didn't cry, didn't look back at Reinhardt, just walked away, 7 blocks through rubble-filled streets to a basement hideout. That night, he held the booklet like it was the only proof he'd ever existed. Reinhardt lit a cigarette, forgot the moment in under a minute. Just another Jew, another checkpoint, another day before the Soviets arrived. He had no idea that booklet would become evidence, that the boy would survive. That memory works like evidence when everything else burns. Cruelty takes seconds. Memory takes decades. The boy would carry that booklet across 4 countries before it ended up in a Nuremberg courtroom. And when it did, Reinhardt would realize one thing too late. Witnesses don't forget. They wait. By May 2, 1945, the Soviet noose around Berlin had tightened to nothing. 72 hours until surrender. Klaus Reinhardt stood in his barracks, staring at his SS uniform hanging on a nail. He'd worn it with pride for 8 years. Now it was a death sentence. The Allies were already compiling lists, the Central Registry of War Criminals, they called it. Every SS member's name would end up on that list eventually. He knew what happened to SS officers who surrendered in full uniform. Summary execution, or worse, show trials. Reinhardt made his decision. He burned the SS uniform in a steel drum behind the barracks, watching the insignia blacken and curl. Then he put on a Wehrmacht jacket he'd traded for, regular army, no SS markings. He kept his Wehrmacht paybook, falsified the unit designation with a pencil, smudged the ink to make it look old. The story? Logistics officer, never saw combat, never worked checkpoints, definitely not SS. May 9, 1945. Reinhardt surrendered to American forces processing POWs outside what remained of Berlin. Gave his false name, Wehrmacht credentials. The Americans checked his papers, stamped his file, sent him to a holding camp with 200,000 other prisoners. Meanwhile, the boy had reached the American-controlled zone near Munich. The booklet was still in his coat, sewage stains dried into the leather now, permanent. His mother's handwriting barely visible, but still there. Inside a displaced persons camp, he showed it to a Red Cross worker who cried when she read the name. The worker gave him food, a blanket, wrote down his story. The boy didn't mention the SS guard yet, didn't have the words, but he kept the booklet. Some objects survive because you refuse to let them disappear.
Everyone who erases their past believes they'll stay erased. But the U.S. Army had created something Reinhardt didn't account for: bureaucracy that worked backward. Every POW's name cross-checked against captured SS rosters, unit records, witness statements. Reinhardt's name appeared on a preliminary list in June, but under the wrong unit, a clerical error. The translator had misread his falsified paybook. For now, he was just another Wehrmacht logistics officer waiting for release. The hunt hadn't started yet, but it would. Because somewhere in that displaced persons camp, a boy was learning English and starting to remember everything. July through September 1945, displaced persons camps across Germany filled with survivors. 250,000 people trying to piece together what came next. American war crimes investigation teams moved through the camps with translators, notebooks, cameras. They interviewed witnesses, took statements, filed everything in massive archives. Supreme Court Justice Robert H. Jackson led the American prosecution effort, building cases that would define what justice meant after atrocity. The boy, now living in a Bavarian orphanage run by Jewish relief organizations, sat across from a U.S. Army investigator and a translator. The investigator asked about Berlin. The boy described Alexanderplatz, April 28th, the checkpoint, the laugh. His hands shook when he mentioned the booklet. The translator wrote it all down: guard's height, voice quality, insignia, even the scar on his left hand. The boy remembered because you remember everything about the person who made you crawl. The statement got filed with 40,000 others, but something about it stuck. The translator noted the specific detail: theatrical laugh, performed for other guards. That phrase appeared in 3 other statements from Berlin survivors. Same checkpoint, same time frame, different witnesses describing the same voice pattern. The investigators started a file: Alexanderplatz checkpoint personnel. They cross-referenced captured SS rosters, found 12 men named Klaus Reinhardt, narrowed it by unit assignments, service dates, physical descriptions. One matched: Alexanderplatz duty roster, April 1945, SS-Oberscharführer rank, 8-year service record. But that Reinhardt's POW file listed him as Wehrmacht logistics. Either the roster was wrong, or Reinhardt had lied about his service. An investigator in a tent outside Nuremberg circled the name in red ink on a captured document. That moment, pen touching paper, changed everything. Bureaucracy saved what memory couldn't prove alone. The boy's testimony provided the human anchor. The rosters provided the paper trail. Together, they became a case file. Finding him would require one witness willing to face him again. The Americans approached the boy in October, asked if he could identify the guard in person. The boy looked at his booklet, sewage stains still visible, and said yes. October 1945. American investigators tracked Klaus Reinhardt through POW records using fingerprint analysis and cross-referenced service files. His cover story was Wehrmacht logistics, never in Berlin, never worked checkpoints, never SS. But his Wehrmacht paybook showed a transfer date that didn't match the unit records. The discrepancy was minor, just 3 days off, but it was enough. Investigators requested his original SS file from captured archives. There it was: Klaus Reinhardt, SS-Oberscharführer, Berlin checkpoint duty through April 1945. He'd falsified everything. Meanwhile, the boy continued English lessons at the orphanage. An art teacher asked him to draw something from Berlin. He drew the checkpoint. Alexanderplatz in ruins, Soviet smoke on the horizon, a guard kicking something into a gutter. The teacher didn't ask questions. Some drawings explained themselves. Investigators located 3 other survivors who mentioned a laughing SS guard at Alexanderplatz. None knew his name, but all described the same voice, low, theatrical, like he was entertaining himself. That consistency mattered. 1 witness could be mistaken. 4 describing the same behavior pattern became evidence. The real logistics. The U.S. held 740,000 German POWs in Bavaria alone. Sorting them took months. Investigators narrowed the search to 200 possible matches by comparing unit assignments and locations. They eliminated anyone who could prove they were elsewhere in April 1945. Reinhardt couldn't prove anything because he destroyed his real papers. His Wehrmacht story had holes, the investigators noticed. Here's the twist nobody saw coming. Reinhardt had almost been released in September. His file was in the discharge pile, paperwork ready. Then someone noticed the unit transfer discrepancy and pulled his file for review.
That clerical pause, one bureaucrat being thorough, kept him in custody long enough for the investigation to catch up. The guilty survive on clerical mistakes until one mistake catches them. By late October, investigators had enough. They sent a fingerprint comparison request to Berlin Records. The Soviets still controlled that sector, but they cooperated when it involved SS war crimes. 2 weeks later, confirmation arrived. Fingerprints matched. Klaus Reinhardt, SS-Oberscharführer, located in Camp Marcus under false identity. A fingerprint would change everything. Now they just needed the witness to make the identification stick. November 15, 1945. American investigators brought the boy to their base outside Nuremberg. The room smelled like tobacco smoke and typewriter ink. They spread 40 photographs across a wooden table. SS personnel captured from Berlin checkpoints. No names visible, just faces. The investigator said, "Take your time. If you're not sure, say you're not sure." The boy studied the photographs. 3rd row, 6th from the left. The face was cleaner now, better fed, but the eyes were the same. "That's him. I remember the scar." The investigator checked the back of the photo. Klaus Reinhardt. They had him. Prosecutors verified Reinhardt's location, detained under the name Manfred Bauer in Camp Marcus, still claiming Wehrmacht service. They transported him to Nuremberg that night. Reinhardt still believed he was safe. His cover story had held for 6 months. He didn't know about the fingerprints, the witness statements, or the boy who'd kept the booklet. The boy practiced his testimony with a translator. His hand shook when he held the booklet. A prosecutor asked, "Are you ready to see him again?" The boy nodded. Ready wasn't the right word. Necessary was closer. The booklet got photographed for evidence. Catalog number, Exhibit 47B. Front and back covers, every page. The sewage stains captured in black and white. The photos went into the case file alongside the boy's written statement, the SS roster, and Reinhardt's falsified Wehrmacht papers. The Nuremberg trials officially began November 20th, 1945, though that date marked the major trials of high-ranking Nazis. Smaller cases, like Reinhardt's, were processed through the Palace of Justice in parallel tracks. Reinhardt was assigned a cell in the basement of the Palace of Justice. Through the barred window, he could see the courtroom building. He asked the guard, "What am I charged with?" The guard checked the file. Cruelty at checkpoints, abuse of Jewish civilians. The specificity of it hit Reinhardt then. They didn't just suspect him, they knew. The moment you realize someone remembered is the moment you're already caught. The trial date was set for 6 days later, November 21st, 11 a.m. The prosecutors were building a case brick by brick, and the foundation was a 12-year-old boy's memory and a leather booklet that should have dissolved in sewage, but didn't. November 16th to 19th, 1945. The boys stayed in American custody quarters, a converted hotel with cracked windows and GI guards at every door. He read an English primer someone gave him, practiced his testimony sentences in front of a mirror. I remember his laugh. He kicked my booklet into the gutter. He said I would need it for my corpse tag. Over and over until the words sounded steady. Reinhardt sat in his cell 3 floors below, piecing together how specific the charges were. Alexanderplatz, April 28th, Jewish boy, identity booklet. They weren't guessing. Someone had told them. His defense strategy crystallized. Deny everything. Claim mistaken identity. Insist the witness was confused or lying. Child testimony was unreliable, his lawyer could argue. Memories from trauma couldn't be trusted. He'd seen worse men walk free on technicalities. Prosecutors prepped their witness list. The boy was witness number 4, scheduled after the duty roster expert, the fingerprint analyst, and a former SS guard who'd turned informant. The Nuremberg trials included 403 witnesses across all cases. This trial would use 4. Sometimes less is more. The prosecution didn't need complexity. They needed clarity. This guard, this checkpoint, this act, this witness. The boy's testimony was scheduled for 11 a.m., November 21st. The night before, he slept with the booklet under his pillow, like he'd done for 7 months. It wasn't about luck or superstition. It was about making sure it was still there when he woke up. Objects become proof when everything else is memory. The booklet's meaning had shifted through each stage. First, it was legal documentation, then survival proof, then evidence. Now it was a weapon, not violent, but precise. The kind of weapon that worked in courtrooms instead of streets. The twist came the night before testimony. Reinhardt's lawyer submitted a motion to exclude witness testimony on grounds of unreliability. The judge reviewed it in chambers, denied it within an hour. The ruling? Witness testimony is admissible when corroborated by documentary evidence. Proceed as scheduled. Reinhardt's last hope collapsed before trial even started. Justice moves slowly until it arrives at your cell door. Then it moves fast. The courtroom was 200 meters away. The boy would walk that distance in the morning. Reinhardt would be sitting there when he arrived. And between them would be 7 months, 650 kilometers, and 1 leather booklet that refused to disappear. November 20th, 1945. Reinhardt met with his lawyer in a windowless room. The lawyer was German, court-appointed, overworked. He laid out the situation with brutal honesty. They have 4 witnesses, duty rosters, and your fingerprints. The physical evidence is thin, just testimony and documents, but the documents are solid. Reinhardt's hands relaxed slightly on the table. Just testimony felt manageable. He could challenge a child's memory. He could create doubt. His lawyer continued. The prosecution's case relies on a Jewish boy identifying you 7 months after the incident. In cross-examination, I'll establish the unreliability of traumatic memory, the possibility of coaching, the fact that he was starving and might not remember clearly. Reinhardt nodded. He'd spent his career intimidating people into silence. He could outwit a 14-year-old witness. Meanwhile, 3 floors up, prosecutors walk the boy through courtroom procedure. You'll sit here, he'll be there. Just tell what happened. When they ask if you see him, point and say yes. The boy's voice was quiet. What if I forget something? The prosecutor put a hand on his shoulder. You carried that booklet for 7 months through hell. You won't forget. The Nuremberg courtroom had been designed for 350 observers. High ceilings, wood paneling, translation booths with 4 languages running simultaneously. The architecture meant to convey permanence, like whatever happened there would echo through history. The boy didn't care about architecture. He cared that Reinhardt would be 30 feet away and couldn't touch him. Reinhardt prepared his counterstory with his lawyer. He was never at Alexanderplatz. He worked logistics, away from checkpoints. Maybe he passed through once, but hundreds of guards looked similar. The witness must be confused, mistaking him for someone else. It was plausible enough for reasonable doubt. Here's what Reinhardt didn't know. The prosecution had a second surprise witness. Another SS guard who'd worked Alexanderplatz had flipped, trading testimony for leniency. He'd confirm Reinhardt's methods, his patterns, his reputation. The boy's testimony would anchor the human cost. The guard's testimony would prove it was habit, not a one-time mistake. Arrogance mistakes silence for forgetting. Reinhardt believed the war had buried his crimes. He believed survivors wouldn't talk, couldn't prove, had nothing but trauma and confusion. The translator would relay every word in 3 languages. And by lunchtime tomorrow, everyone in that courtroom would know exactly what Klaus Reinhardt had done at Alexanderplatz. November 21st, 1945, 11:07 a.m. The courtroom was full. Prosecutors, defense attorneys, military observers, journalists with notebooks. The boy entered through a side door, walked to the witness stand.
An interpreter positioned beside him. The room went silent except for the hum of translation equipment. Reinhardt saw him, and his face changed. Not dramatically, just a flicker of recognition, color draining, jaw tightening. He knew. The prosecutor caught it, made a note. Witnesses don't forget, and neither do perpetrators. The brain remembers what it wants to hide. The prosecutor's voice came clear through the courtroom. Do you see the man who kicked your booklet into the sewage at Alexanderplatz checkpoint on April 28, 1945? The boy pointed. That man, in the blue suit. 30 feet between them. The interpreter translated into German, French, Russian. Reinhardt stared straight ahead. The boy described the scene with details that made it impossible to dismiss. Date, April 28th. Location, Alexanderplatz, Eastern Checkpoint. Weather, smoke haze from fires, Soviet artillery audible. Time, afternoon, around 3 p.m. based on shadows. Other guards, 3, maybe 4, standing near the barrier. Civilians, maybe 50 people waiting to pass through. The booklet, standard Jewish identification, leather cover, his mother's handwriting inside. Reinhardt's lawyer objected 3 times. Relevance, leading question, speculative testimony. The judge overruled each one. This wasn't speculation. This was eyewitness account corroborated by documentary evidence. Then the boy reached into his jacket and pulled out the booklet, held it up. This one. He kicked it into the gutter and said, I'd need it for my corpse tag. The courtroom went silent. Even the translators paused mid-sentence. The stenographer's typewriter stopped mid-keystroke. Physical evidence changes everything. A story becomes real when you can touch what it describes. The prosecutor took the booklet, held it for the court to see. Exhibit 47B. Note the sewage stains, the damaged pages, the handwriting inside the cover, the witness's mother's hand. This booklet was logged into evidence 3 weeks ago. The witness carried it from Berlin to Munich to Nuremberg, 650 kilometers, 7 months. Because it was the only proof he existed. He handed it back to the boy. Because he knew someday someone would listen. The strongest evidence is the object that survived the crime. Paper and leather outlasted the Reich. Memory outlasted denial. And in that moment, every person in the courtroom understood exactly what had happened at Alexanderplatz. The defense's cross-examination would backfire. You're about to see how. The defense lawyer stood, adjusted his glasses. How can you be certain, 7 months later, that this specific man was the guard who took your booklet? The boy's answer came steady. I remember his laugh. He did it twice. Everyone heard it. The lawyer pressed. Were other guards laughing? The boy nodded. Yes, but his voice was different. Lower, longer. Like he wanted everyone to hear it. The lawyer tried again. Isn't it possible you're confusing him with another guard? Many SS officers looked similar. The boy met his eyes. I see his face every night. I don't confuse it with anyone. The prosecutor called the second witness. Former SS-Oberscharführer who'd worked Alexanderplatz, now cooperating in exchange for reduced charges. He confirmed. Klaus Reinhardt worked that checkpoint April through early May. We all knew his methods. Public humiliation. He believed it kept order.
The prosecutor asked for examples.
The guard described Reinhardt forcing elderly Jews to dance, making others clean boots with their bare hands, and yes, kicking documents into sewage and forcing people to retrieve them. It was his signature move, the guard said. Entertainment for him, terror for everyone else. Reinhardt couldn't stay silent. He stood up, shouted, "I was defending the Reich, doing my duty. They were enemies of Germany." The judge slammed his gavel. Defendant will remain silent or be removed from these proceedings. Two guards moved toward Reinhardt. His lawyer grabbed his arm, pulled him back into his seat, but the damage was done. The outburst validated everything the boy had testified to. Rage confesses what silence tried to hide. The judge represented international law, American, British, French, Soviet authorities working together to establish precedent. The Nuremberg trials weren't just about individual punishment. They were about creating legal language for crimes that had no name yet. Crimes against humanity. The systematic dehumanization that turned people into obstacles and cruelty into policy. The prosecutor rested his case. 3 witnesses, the boy, the corroborating guard, and a document expert who verified the Alexanderplatz duty roster. No physical forensics, no photographs of the specific incident, no confession, just testimony, documents, and 1 leather booklet marked Exhibit 47B. Sometimes that's enough. When the testimony is specific enough, when the documents corroborate, when the perpetrator can't explain the gaps in his story, that's when juries and judges decide truth from reasonable doubt. The verdict would come in 3 days. The judges needed time to review testimony transcripts in 4 languages, examine the documentary evidence, deliberate on precedent. Reinhardt went back to his cell. The boy went back to American quarters. Both of them waited, but only one of them slept that night. November 22nd to 24th, 1945. Deliberation period. 4 judges, representing the Allied powers, reviewed case files in private chambers. The boy's testimony transcript ran 14 pages. The corroborating guard's testimony added 9 more. The duty roster evidence and fingerprint analysis filled another 30 pages of technical documentation. Together, it painted a clear picture. Klaus Reinhardt, SS-Oberscharführer, systematically abused Jewish civilians at Alexanderplatz checkpoint as a form of crowd control and personal entertainment. Prosecutors compiled their closing arguments around the booklet. They'd photographed it from every angle: the sewage stains, the water damage, the mother's handwriting barely visible inside the cover. Those photographs became permanent record, visual proof that this wasn't theoretical. A real boy had crawled through real sewage to retrieve real documentation, while a real SS guard laughed. The specificity of it mattered. War crimes weren't abstract. They happened at specific checkpoints, on specific dates, to specific people. The boy returned to the orphanage to wait. The Americans drove him back to Bavaria, told him they'd notify him when the verdict came. He wrote a letter to the lead prosecutor, short, careful English. "Thank you for listening. My mother would have been proud someone wrote this down." The prosecutor kept that letter in his personal files for 40 years. Some evidence is too human to file away in official records. Reinhardt's defense collapsed under its own weight. No alibi. He couldn't prove he was anywhere else on April 28th. No counter-witnesses. None of his fellow guards would testify for him. No documentation. He'd destroyed his SS papers himself. The judges reviewed his outburst in court, noted it in their deliberation. Defendant showed no remorse, claiming duty as justification for abuse. That phrase would appear in the final verdict. The Nuremberg trials established crimes against humanity as international legal precedent. Before 1945, no legal framework existed for prosecuting officials who committed atrocities under state authority. The trials created that framework. Reinhardt's case was minor compared to the major trials. He wasn't a general, wasn't responsible for thousands of deaths, wasn't part of high-level policy. But his case mattered because it established that low-level perpetrators were still perpetrators. Following orders wasn't a defense.
Doing your duty wasn't justification for cruelty. The booklet got returned to the boy after being copied for permanent record. He'd carry it through the rest of his life: college in America, marriage, career, grandchildren. But in November 1945, it still meant evidence. The judges reviewed the exhibit logs one final time. Then they reached their verdict.
The twist? Reinhardt's sentence would be less severe than anyone expected. Minor war crimes. 8 years imprisonment. Justice arrived, but not in the measure anyone hoped for. November 25th, 1945. The verdict was read in the same courtroom where testimony had been given. Guilty. 8 years labor camp. Reinhardt showed no visible reaction. His lawyer had warned him execution was possible. 8 years felt like mercy. The boy wasn't present for the verdict reading. He learned about it 3 days later through a translator at the orphanage. 8 years. He took my childhood in one afternoon. The math didn't balance, but justice rarely does. The translator explained. Reinhardt's crimes were classified as cruelty and abuse, not murder. Under the tribunal's sentencing guidelines, that meant imprisonment, not execution. The precedent mattered more than the individual case. Future trials would reference this one: checkpoint abuses, testimonial evidence, crimes against humanity at the lowest operational level. Reinhardt was transferred to Landsberg prison, the same facility that had held Adolf Hitler in 1924 after the beer hall putsch. History loops in strange ways. Small ironies appear in prison records and old photos. Reinhardt's reaction to the sentence, according to guards who documented prisoner responses: relief it wasn't execution. Bitter resentment about the boy's testimony. He never expressed remorse. In written statements for parole consideration, he maintained he'd been performing necessary security functions during wartime. Language like that reveals everything about how perpetrators reframe their actions. The American prosecutor met with the boy before he left Nuremberg. Your courage helped establish legal precedent. Trials like this one will reference your testimony for decades. The boy nodded, didn't say much. Courage isn't the word survivors use. Necessity fits better. Someone had to speak. He had the booklet. He was still alive. The equation was simple. Public record shows the Nuremberg trials continued until 1946, with 12 subsequent trials addressing different aspects of Nazi war crimes. Reinhardt's case barely made the newspapers. No famous names, no massive body count, just another SS guard sentenced for checkpoint abuses. But legal scholars would cite it in discussions about testimonial evidence standards and the scope of individual responsibility under international law. Reinhardt served 6 years, released early in 1951 for good behavior. Prison records note he worked in the laundry, kept to himself, caused no disciplinary issues. The boy learned about the early release while studying at New York University, now 18 years old, building a new life in America. The news hit hard, not surprise, but confirmation that justice has limits. The booklet was still in his desk drawer at the dormitory. He'd carried it across the Atlantic. Some objects become permanent companions. The trial ended, but the sentence both carried never does. They would never see each other again. But their intersection at Alexanderplatz defined both their lives for the next 70 years. 1951 to 1960, the boy became a man, built a life in America, eventually changed his name to something that sounded less European, less obviously Jewish, less like a target. He finished university, married, worked as an accountant in Manhattan. The booklet traveled with him through every move: college apartment, first house, second house after the kids were born. It stayed in desk drawers or safe deposit boxes, never thrown away, never far from reach. Klaus Reinhardt returned to Germany after his release, settled in a small town near Munich, worked construction, lived quietly under his real name. No one asked about his past. West Germany in the 1950s had thousands of former Nazis trying to reintegrate into civilian life. The economy needed workers. Silence became national policy, unofficial but pervasive.
Reinhardt married, had a daughter, attended church on Sundays. According to neighbors interviewed decades later, he was polite, kept his lawn maintained, never talked about the war. The survivor never spoke publicly about his testimony. When people asked about his childhood, he said, "I came from Germany after the war," and changed the subject. His wife knew some of it. His children learned pieces when they were older. But he didn't make it his identity. Survival isn't a career, it's just what happened. Reinhardt died in 1967, age 54, heart attack while working a construction site. The local newspaper ran a 3-line death notice. No mention of SS service, no mention of Nuremberg, just name, age, survivors. His daughter found some old photographs in his belongings, their mocked uniform, not SS. He destroyed those photos, or claimed he had. The survivor donated the booklet to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in 1980, decades after the trial. By then, he was in his late 40s, his own children grown. He wrote a note for the museum archives. "This survived. So did I. That's the point." A curator asked during the donation interview, "Does this bring you closure?" He thought about it. Testimony was the closure. The trial was the closure. This, he gestured at the booklet behind its glass case. This is just proof it happened. West Germany continued trying Nazi war criminals through the 1970s, though convictions became rarer as witnesses aged and evidence scattered. By then, Reinhardt was already dead. His case file remained in Nuremberg Tribunal archives, Exhibit 47B, still listed in the index. The booklet became part of permanent exhibition. Thousands of visitors see it annually. Read the placard. Learn about Alexanderplatz. See the sewage stains through protective glass. The meaning had transformed completely. From legal documentation to survival proof, to courtroom weapon, to educational memorial. Survival isn't victory, but remembering is. The story doesn't end with justice. It ends with evidence that outlasts everyone involved. Present day, United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, Washington, D.C. The booklet sits behind glass in the testimonial evidence section. Label reads, Exhibit 47B, Nuremberg Trials, 1945/Identity Booklet, Ausweis, belonging to child survivor / used in testimony against SS-Oberscharführer Klaus Reinhardt. Below that, a longer text panel describes Alexanderplatz checkpoint, April 28, 1945. The trial, the verdict. Visitors stop, read the placard, move on. School groups with notebooks. Tourists with audio guides. Holocaust survivors on pilgrimage. The booklet tells the story without speaking. Sewage stains still visible through the protective glass. Brown-yellow discoloration on leather that should have dissolved 80 years ago, but didn't. The survivor who carried it died in 2015, age 82, surrounded by grandchildren in a hospital room in White Plains, New York. His final instruction, documented in his will, keep it on display. People need to see what hatred looks like. Not the Holocaust in general terms, specific acts, specific cruelty, so they understand it wasn't abstract policy. It was guards at checkpoints making individual decisions to humiliate people for entertainment. Public record confirms 6 million Jews murdered during the Holocaust. Survivors testified at trials worldwide, Nuremberg, Eichmann, Frankfurt Auschwitz trials, hundreds of smaller prosecutions. The legal precedent established in 1945-46 created framework for international criminal law that continues today. The International Criminal Court, genocide conventions, crimes against humanity statutes, they all trace back to Nuremberg. Reinhardt's laugh that April afternoon echoed for maybe 30 seconds, long enough for other guards to join in, long enough for civilians to remember, long enough for a 12-year-old boy to encode the sound into memory, where it would stay for 70 years. That boy's voice in the Nuremberg courtroom echoed through decades of Holocaust education. His testimony helped establish that ordinary cruelty counts as crime, even when it's small scale, even when it's just one guard at one checkpoint making one boy crawl. The booklet's transformation is complete. Personal terror to survival proof, to evidence, to weapon, to memorial, to education. The object that started as bureaucratic documentation became proof that individual stories matter. Not just statistics, not just millions of dead, but specific people at specific places making specific choices.
Final echo. Cruelty forgets. Evidence remembers. Testimony outlasts both.
The museum closes at 5 p.m. Guards check the galleries, turn off half the lights. The booklet stays behind glass through the night. Sewage stains visible, even in dim emergency lighting. Tomorrow, more visitors will see it. Read the placard. Learn what happened at Alexanderplatz. Some will take photos, some will cry. All will leave knowing that documentation survives when everything else burns. And that somewhere in history, a 12-year-old boy crawled through sewage to retrieve proof he existed, then used that proof to make sure nobody forgot.